Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here at the Duke University at the John Hope Franklin Center, joined by Professor Alisha Gaines, who is Associate Professor of English at Florida State University and the author of Black for a Day, White Fantasies of Race and Empathy, UNC Press 2017, which Jonathan Holliday, provost at at Northwestern University, says is a nuanced examination of the many complicated layers that inform the Black experience. How are you doing, Alisha?
I'm well. It's good to be back in Durham and at Duke. Yeah.
Professor Gaines is also a 2009 PhD in the Department of English, so welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So how did you get to this project? All right. This idea of white fantasies of Blackness.
Right. So I had just come off of my prelims here at Duke, and I saw this commercial for this show, FX's Black White.
Black White.
And I saw the commercial, and I was mildly horrified, but also really intrigued. And I wanted to know, what is the genealogy that gets us in a moment of 2006 for a cable show to literally have a Black family in whiteface and a white family in black?
And executive produced by Ice Cube, if I recall.
Yes. And he also has a really bad theme song for the show. And so that was really it. I was already interested in kind of thinking about identity, thinking about blackface minstrelsy mostly, but then I saw this 2006 iteration of what I saw as this kind of neo-blackface. And I wanted to figure out, how did we get here? Especially in a moment around going up to Obama's election and kind of post-race, and what does that have to do with all of it? And so what is enabling all of this? That's what really started that creepy TV show, which is the chapter 4 of the book.
And you know, and social media has changed our relationship to this, because now we're hyper aware of what happens in every little high school in middle America every Halloween, when some group of kids decides, well, you know, I'm gonna dress up as Lil Wayne today.
Yes. And
put on blackface and some fake dreads. So we're kind of hyper aware of that kind of moment.
Yeah,
now.
Social media makes this this information, you know, it just like crosses the country, and also fills up my inbox, because everyone thinks that anytime a white person is in blackface,
that you need
that
to know.
I need to know about it. So I know about every high school and every bad Halloween party, particularly because of my mom and my grandmother. But yeah, the social media has definitely made this story have legs.
Right. Now we know that blackface minstrelsy has a larger history, a longer history, but you really start with John Howard Griffin and his book, Black Like Me.
I actually started before Griffin with Ray Sprigle.
Right,
so
right.
Ray Sprigle is the one in the 40s, kind of this post-war moment, who does it before John Howard Griffin. But you're right to forget him,
right?
Because everyone forgets him. So even the fact that you think I started with John Howard Griffin like speaks to part of the problem with Ray Sprigle.
How obscure he actually is,
right? John Howard Griffin never acknowledged him, even though he went down south for 4 harrowing weeks. He didn't change his skin like Griffin did. He just shaved his head, wore a bad hat, giant glasses, and just kind of Jim Crow'd himself, basically, on the wrong side of segregation. And he was taken for black, but he didn't experience anything that would give him any credibility or any black cred, like Griffin did. And so I think that's part of why we forget him.
Talk about the difference of the responses to it, because there's a way in which, Sprigle doing this in the 40s, there's a heightened sensibility about race and integration and segregation and these things by the time we get to Black Like Me, by the time we get to Griffin's book. So it becomes a kind of national sensation, in part because race has now been sensationalized in the early 1960s in ways that it hadn't been before.
Absolutely. The timing around Griffin is completely different. And also the motives that Griffin kind of puts forth in that moment is different. So Ray Sprigle in 1948 was looking for a second Pulitzer. It was very deserving.
Right.
And even though it was so for Griffin as well, he couches it as this narrative of, I want to know what it means to be a black person, and the only way I can do that is to, the only way we can cross these cross-racial divides is if I do this kind of ridiculous racial project. So we were ready. I think we were ready for Griffin's intervention in a different way than we were ready for Spriggle.
And 2 years later, there's a film.
Yes.
of it, right? So it's like, so now it's like writ large in the culture.
Right. There's a film in 1964. It's terrible. They don't change the color of the actor's eyes. They darken his skin, but you can see like the creases of the paint. You can see the creases of his skin coming through the paint. I wouldn't recommend it as a cultural text, but yes, it does let you know that this story had some legs. Mm-hmm. And it had legs not only in print media, because it started out in sepia.
Sepia magazine is serial.
Sepia magazine. It was serialized in sepia, then became Black Like Me, and then became the film. And then John Howard Griffin had a very long kind of career rethinking the project and thinking through the project, and then going on and mentoring Grace Halsell, who does the project as the first kind of woman to do the project. So, yeah.
What kind of impact do you think Griffin's book First really had on how America thought about race in that era?
I think it had a powerful impact, and I say that because we're still teaching it in middle school and high schools now. I did an informal survey as I was writing the book over the semesters in my classes. Who's read this book or heard of this book, and hands were going up in, northern Florida. Still,
almost 60 years later.
Right. So many years later, and I was kind of disabusing them of this notion that it's this text of empathy, and that it's this cherished book. I still had students say, well, it really opened my eyes to what it means to be Black. And that is mildly terrifying.
Yeah, right.
It also shows that we have a lack of racial imagination, and it also shows that we're not reading Black folks.
Yeah. You mentioned that he mentored Grace Halsell. Mm-hmm. And I have to read the whole title of her book because, it's Soul Sister. But the subtitle is like, The Journal of a White Woman Who Turned Herself Black and Went to Live and Work in Harlem and Mississippi. It's just extra.
It's very extra. The whole book is extra. So she reads John Howard Griffin's Black Like Me and says, I can do that, and I think the project should be done by a woman. They meet, he actually says, I think you should do it, and they have this kind of correspondence back and forth as he's tutoring her and teaching her how to be a Black woman.
And it's a different political moment, right? Because we've gone from
the
Kennedy era and integration, and now it's like the height of Black power.
Right, it's the height of Black power. So her timing is just so egregious.
I mean, even from the title, like Soul Sister, like I'm down with y'all.
Yes,
yeah.
It was 1969 when Soul Sister comes out, and the problem is, we don't need. This is not what allyship looks like in this moment, and so she really does take up space in these ways, and the interesting long and extra title is because she starts in Harlem because she wants to situate herself in these Black communities, but she feels they're not Black enough. So she's got to go down south to find the Black folk experience.
In Mississippi.
Yes, which is authentic for her in ways that, Harlem, they're middle class and they're white aspirational.
But you talk about the fact that, she's like, okay, I need to experience life as a Black woman, but I don't actually know anything about Black women. So she essentially goes to a Harlem brothel.
Absolutely.
To spend some time with Black lesbians so she can actually understand the interiority of Black women.
Well, yeah, she goes to this Harlem guest house, but what she doesn't realize is that they're all Black lesbians. It's kind of, she has this moment where she's looking around and she's like, oh, wait a minute. She's heard whispers from the guys, on the street that those, women love only women, and then she finally realized, like, this is a lesbian guest house. I have to get out of here. Clearly, this is not authentic Blackness either. And so she's got this really strange kind of misunderstanding about Black queer communities and how she disparages them for the Mississippi folk that apparently can't be queer at all because there's no Black queerness in the South.
How were Black audiences referring and responding to these texts?
Good question. So John Howard Griffin narrates it differently every time. and he does it based on the timing of the text. So when he talks about it at first, he's saying, well, this was welcomed, this is something that's needed, Black folks asked me to do it. But then when he finally gets to the 70s and he talks about in A Time to Be Human, he really says, oh, okay, well, he kind of backs away from the project a bit. But Grace Halsell, even though she had a huge spread in Ebony, she was also in the Chicago Defender. So she's on one hand pitching it in Black periodicals. She really wanted to be seen as legitimate by Black audiences. They were not having it. And there were tons of like editorial letters from Black readers like, we don't need your help here.
Right. It's a different moment.
Right, it's a different moment. Please move on.
And then she decides to go become a Native woman.
Yes, she becomes she makes a career out of this. She becomes not only a Native woman, but an undocumented Mexican migrant worker. And so how do you fake not being a citizen, which is an interesting thing. She keeps crossing the border, hoping to get picked up, and not being picked up. She does it in various ways. She takes the van, she tries to swim the Rio, but she, at the end of the day, is a citizen of the United States. And so, what does it mean?
Mental health notwithstanding, what do you think are her motivations?
I think this was a woman who really wanted to see the world in a lot of ways. I think she fashioned herself as a white woman who had access to playing and performing these identities in ways that only bolstered her whiteness and her. She did not want to be seen as a Southern belle. She did not want to be seen as someone who was disengaged from all of these kinds of conversations that are going around. Remember, she was a staff writer for the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, so she was part of that wheeling and dealing.
She has a great, yeah.
But she also had this kind of thirst for adventure, and I think her version of adventure was putting on other people's skin and walking in other people's shoes in these really kind of egregious sort of ways.
We're talking to Professor Alisha Gaines, who is Associate Professor of English at Florida State University. She's the author of Black for a Day, White Fantasies of Race and Empathy, published by our friends down the road at UNC Press. Shift gears for a moment. I was touched at the beginning of the book where you thank your Spelman professors. You are a Spelman woman.
Absolutely.
You thank Spelman woman. Just watching Beychella.
Yes. Now everyone wishes they went to an HBCU.
And suddenly
and
HBCUs
I really did.
are so resonant. Talk a little bit about that experience at an HBCU and really how it has informed the kind of choices you've made as a scholar and a thinker now.
Yeah, so being at Spelman was completely foundational for me. There was no way I could have imagined myself as a professor in any kind of space without having the 4 years I had at Spelman. Before Spelman, I had never had a teacher of any kind of color. And so just walking to a classroom and seeing a person of authority, giving knowledge in these ways, talking about women producing knowledge for other Black women, because it's a historically Black college for women specifically, was completely impactful and undid so much of my token Black girl anxiety that I had growing up, being in that space. And so it were those professors in the English department and a dean there at Spelman that even gave me a way to imagine myself as a thinker and a scholar. I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. I would be a terrible lawyer, but I'm a good teacher, and that's because I have good models for it.
July, or is it June, summer of 2009?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson passes.
Yes.
It'll be 10 years next summer. And I knew how tethered you were to him as a performer and an artist prior to 2009. How are you processing what his legacy is now, almost a decade after his death? Particularly now that we have so much more access to his life in ways that we may not have had, prior to 2009.
Absolutely. I think his legacy is so palpable still. I think about the song "They Don't Care About Us" as a new motto for what's going on in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right, and also in the immigration movement.
And also in the immigration movement.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to me that we are finding the Michael Jackson as kind of this leader and icon of protest.
Right. When we so thought of him as apolitical when he was alive.
Absolutely, and he never was, but we're able to kind of excavate that part of him when he was giving us dynamic protest songs, and we're kind of using that as a refrain now to shape how we're thinking about these movements. And also, once again, you have to think about Beyonce, who showed up, in a very similar outfit for that Super Bowl performance as Michael did when he did his Super Bowl performance. And so it wasn't just a calling back to Black Panthers like all the very upset white folks thought. It was also bringing his legacy back to the stage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that this project started with black-white reality television, and it's still the early stages of reality television, but not really.
Yeah, not really.
And now we're dealing with reality television on crack, whether that's network or cable or even online. Do you think we're having any better discussions about race in 2018 because of the access that people now have to be able to create media?
Specifically on reality TV or just
in general,
media in general. Yeah, I think we are having better. I don't know if better, louder, and more more people can get into the conversation.
Right.
Through these various medias. For instance, Love and Hip Hop Hollywood, we got to have a conversation about Afro-Latinx identities, which we were not having before a few characters were in Love and Hip Hop Miami, just kind of putting that in the forefront of the culture. I also think that sort of media stories around race that get picked up and become viral, it's a way of understanding what kind of cultural nerves are being hit. Like Rachel Dolezal, which I talk about in my book. We don't have to talk about it ever again. But and I also think that, as far as more representation in different types of media, where media is moving from somewhat, for like Issa Rae, something like Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, from YouTube to HBO's Insecure. I mean, and how fast.
I actually think that Misadventures is a better show, but that's just me.
We will debate this after the show. It's not appropriate here. So, but the fact that move even happened is, and the conversations that they're having on that show, it's amazing. So that kind of our mainstream media is reacting to what's happening when we take control of our own content, and whether we call that exploitation, I don't think so. I think there's one of those business words, synergy, right? That's happening there. Or if you think about Donald Glover's Atlanta and the amazing work that is being done on that show, and the fact that they are very adamant that this is a Black show in a different, and what that means in different layers.
Absolutely. I have to imagine that, as you were finishing the book and you're wondering how to come with some closure, that Rachel Dolezal had to be like a gift.
And a curse. So the book had a completely different epilogue, actually. It was out to readers' reports when Rachel hit. And so I got my readers' reports and I was like, of course. They both readers said, we need a Dolezal epilogue. We need a Rachel. So I scrapped my epilogue that was originally part of the book and wrote the Dolezal epilogue. And I thought that was going to be the end of the Dolezal story, but she keeps popping.
She's coming back.
She keeps popping up like that whack-a-mole.
I'm sure there's got to be a reality series in her future.
In her future? Well, there's going to be a Netflix documentary that actually drops on Saturday. I don't want to, this is not a plug. This is not a plug. But there's a Netflix documentary that drops on Saturday, which a lot of people are kind of angry about. I feel like I am compelled to watch it for research purposes.
Of course.
So we'll see what that yields. She's written a memoir,
Right. That.
which is often linked to my book on Amazon, like frequently bought together.
So it is a gift.
Sure. Sure. I mean, what it is it's an interesting moment that leads us into a larger cultural conversation.
Right.
And people have lots of opinions and feelings about Rachel Dolezal, and so that can spark some debate.
Yeah.
I would like the debate to not be centered around her specifically and thinking about these larger issues of race and culture and embodiment and what it means to be intrinsically or spiritually Black, whatever that means for her.
What's next for you?
What's next is actually picking up that old epilogue and dusting it off. So that epilogue was about, I did this program in Conner Prairie Living History Museum in Indiana, where you pay $20 and for 90 minutes you pretend to be a fugitive slave.
Okay, Black Mirror. It's a Black Mirror episode.
It is a Black Mirror episode.
It's a Black Mirror episode.
It is a Black Mirror episode. So basically for the next couple of years, I'm going to be running around doing very similar living history, public history kind of ethnographies. It's another way for me to think about empathy and kind of these participatory programs that are supposed to inspire an engagement with cross-racial empathy. So that's the next project.
Thank you. We've been joined by Professor Alisha Gaines, Associate Professor of English at Florida State University. She is the author of Black for a Day, White Fantasies of Race and Empathy, 2017, University of North Carolina Press. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed your return to Duke.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every Black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All Black, everything Black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, Black.